In the highest tower of a quiet moss-covered keep that had stood against the winds of centuries, an alchemist named Aurelius bent over his oaken table. The chamber was his sanctuary, his prison, and the crucible of his entire existence. The world knew this place as the Spire of Whispers, a name earned from the strange colored smokes that sometimes coiled from its peak, and the ceaseless low hum of esoteric machinery that vibrated through its ancient stones. The dusk light, soft as a final confession, filtered through a magnificent tripartite stained glass window. Its panels, a masterpiece of a forgotten artisan, depicted the three stages of the great work: Negredo, Albedo, and Rubedo, in shimmering silvers, deep charcoals, and pale ethereal lavenders. For Aurelius, these were the only colors that mattered. Shelves, sagging under the weight of accumulated knowledge, lined the circular walls. They were crammed with ancient scrolls bound in cracked leather, papyrus texts from the sun-scorched ruins of Shilmar, and countless crystal vials and alembics. Many shimmered with latent energy, but most were dark, holding the gray dust of failed attempts. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, rare minerals, and the sharp metallic tang of ozone. This was not the sterile laboratory of a mere chemist. It was the den of a man locked in a generations-long war with reality itself. He had spent not just years, but the entirety of his adult life, 37 grueling years, searching for the fabled elixir of wishful bliss. It was the ultimate, almost heretical ambition of his craft, a potion to manifest one's deepest heart's desire. His quest had begun under the tutelage of Master Ilara, a woman whose wisdom was as sharp and clear as cut crystal, even as she taught him the delicate art of separating essences. She had warned him. "The heart's desire, Aurelius," she had said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves, "is a ravenous beast. To give it form is to unleash it upon the world, and you may not like the shape it takes. True alchemy is not about bending the world to your will, but about purifying the self until it is in harmony with the world." He had revered her, but he had not heeded her. How could he, when the world outside his tower was crumbling? The kingdom of Eldoria was dying a slow, agonizing death. Its famed silver mines, the source of its prosperity for half a millennium, were barren. A decade of blight had left the once fertile farmlands fallow and salted. The people, his people, were gaunt-faced and hollow-eyed. He saw them from his high window, queuing in the gray dawn for a meager ration of bread, their shoulders slumped in a collective portrait of despair. The king, Theron the Kind, was a good man but a weak ruler, lost in his grief for a kingdom he could no longer command. Desperation was a plague, and Aurelius believed he was on the verge of its only cure. Tonight, the culmination of his life's work sat before him. A tiny, unadorned crystal vial, no larger than his thumb, held a liquid that swirled with the light of a captured nebula. He held it between his calloused, potion-stained fingers. As he stared into its hypnotic depths, he thought not of himself, but of them. He envisioned the kingdom's coffers overflowing, the fields green and bountiful, the laughter returning to the market square. His desire was not for riches, he told himself, but for the end of want. It was a noble goal, a selfless ambition. The lie was so beautiful, he had almost come to believe it himself. A sharp tapping at the window pane jolted him from his reverie. A jet-black raven, its eyes like polished obsidian, clung to the ledge. Tied to its leg was a small, tightly rolled scroll of black parchment sealed with silver wax. Aurelius knew the seal. Cassian, his rival. They had been students together under Ilara, two sides of the same alchemical coin. Where Aurelius was meticulous, philosophical, and driven by a flawed sense of altruism, Cassian was volatile, brilliant, and consumed by a raw, undisguised lust for power. He practiced a darker, more volatile form of the art, one that involved coercion and sacrifice, not harmony. Aurelius untied the scroll, his fingers stiff. The note was brief, written in Cassian's sharp, arrogant script. Still playing with powders and dewdrops, old friend? The whispers say you are close to your little miracle, but the world does not answer to whispers. It answers to thunder. My work is nearly done, and when it is, this kingdom will have a ruler worthy of its power, not a dreamer in a dusty tower. A cold dread trickled down Aurelius's spine. Cassian wasn't just seeking knowledge, he was seeking a throne. The thunder he spoke of could only be some terrible weaponized form of alchemy. The rivalry was no longer a matter of academic pride. It was a race to define the kingdom's soul. His gaze snapped back to the vial on the table. The time for deliberation was over. The final ingredient, the most perilous to obtain, lay in a lead-lined box beside him. A single, solidified tear of the silent monk of Greyfell, a man who had not uttered a word in 50 years. Aurelius had spent a month in the frigid monastery, not speaking, simply sharing the monk's silence, until the old man, seeing the honest desperation in Aurelius's eyes, had wept a single, perfect tear. With hands that trembled only slightly, he opened the box. Using silver tongs, he lifted the tear, which glittered like a frozen shard of starlight. The swirling liquid in the vial seemed to sense its approach, its inner light pulsing faster, brighter. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an impossible pressure. He could hear Ilara's voice again, a phantom echo from his youth. The world is a tapestry of 1,000,000,000 threads, Aurelius. Pull one, and the entire pattern will warp in ways you cannot predict. He ignored it. He saw the hungry faces, the barren fields. He felt Cassian's ambition like a cold blade at his back. He leaned over the vial, his life's work, his one great hope. The silent monk's tear hovered over the opening. "Let my longing be made real," he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was more than a wish. It was a prayer to a science that had no God. "Let me have the means to heal this broken land." He dropped the tear. For a terrifying second, there was absolute silence. The liquid ceased its swirling and turned a solid, impenetrable black, Negredo. Then, a blinding flash of pure white light erupted from the vial, forcing Aurelius to shield his eyes. Albedo. The light subsided, and the liquid inside was now a soft, shimmering gold, radiating a gentle warmth that pushed back the chill of the tower. Rubedo. The great work was complete. As he uncorked the vial, a gentle silver mist unfurled, carrying the scent of spring rain and blooming lavender. It coiled around his hand, a soft, promising caress. His heart, which had been a frantic drum, was now utterly calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of destiny. He raised the elixir of wishful bliss to his lips, closed his eyes, and drank. The elixir of wishful bliss did not taste of magic or power. It tasted of nothing at all, a void on the tongue that spread not as warmth, but as an unnerving clarity through his entire being. Aurelius swayed, his hand gripping the oaken table for support. The world did not spin. Instead, it sharpened, as if a veil he never knew existed had been lifted from his senses. The low hum of his machinery resolved into a symphony of individual frequencies he could name and purpose. The faint scent of ozone was no longer a smell, but a complex equation of atmospheric particles he understood instinctively. He looked at his hands, and it was as if he could see the very flow of life within them, the intricate dance of humors and energies. The knowledge was not just in his mind, it was his mind. He stumbled back from the table, his heart hammering not with fear, but with awe at the sheer scale of the change. The quest for the elixir had been a lifelong climb up a treacherous mountain, each step earned with sweat and study. Now, he stood at the summit, but he had no memory of the final ascent. He had simply arrived. His gaze fell upon a dull, heavy ingot of lead he used as a paperweight, a stubborn monument to 1,000 failed transmutations. He had spent a year trying to turn that specific ingot into silver using every method known to the art, from the philosophical mercury to the dry path of antimony. It had resisted every attempt. Now he reached out, his fingers hovering over the inert metal. He didn't think about the process. He simply willed the outcome. He held in his mind the desire for gold, not the complex formula, but the pure platonic ideal of it. The lead did not bubble or smoke. It simply changed. The dull gray surrendered, flowing into a lustrous liquid yellow that solidified in an instant. The ingot was now a perfect, flawless brick of pure gold, so bright it seemed to drink the dusk light and radiate it back, warm and heavy. He picked it up. It felt real, but the thrill, the ecstatic jolt of discovery that had driven him his entire life, was absent. There was no pride of accomplishment, only the detached satisfaction of a tool working as designed. A hollow space opened in his chest, a vacuum where his struggle used to be. Before he could process this strange new emptiness, a heavy, rhythmic banging echoed up the spiral staircase, shaking the dust from the rafters. This was no raven's tap. This was the mailed fist of authority. He descended the winding steps, his body feeling strangely light and efficient. He unbarred the heavy oak door. Standing on his threshold were 4 men in the silver and black livery of the Royal Guard. Their leader stepped forward, his armor gleaming, his face set in a grim, weary expression. He was Captain Kalen, a man whose reputation for unyielding loyalty and blunt honesty was known throughout the city. "Alchemist Aurelius," Kalen said, his voice deep and devoid of pleasantry. He did not ask. He stated, "The king requires your presence, now." His eyes darted past Aurelius into the tower's entrance hall, lingering on a rack of distillation coils that gleamed with a new otherworldly cleanliness. Whispers travel fast in a desperate city. They speak of strange lights and impossible feats. Aurelius simply nodded. The fear or defensiveness he might once have felt was gone, replaced by this unassailable calm. He followed them through the winding, cobbled streets of the capital. The despair was palpable, a physical weight in the air. But now, he saw it differently. He saw the precise mineral deficiencies in the brittle mortar of the buildings, the exact nutritional imbalances that caused the sallow complexions of the passers-by. He saw the problems not as a tragedy, but as a series of solvable equations. The royal court was a chamber of shadows and fear. King Theron sat slumped on his throne, his crown slightly askew, his face a mask of exhausted grief. The royal council, merchants, minor lords, and aged scholars whispered amongst themselves, their finery frayed, their faces pinched with anxiety. "Aurelius!" The king's voice was a dry rasp. "They say you have a solution, a miracle." Aurelius stepped forward. He did not feel the need to be humble or dramatic. He simply spoke the truth as he now understood it. The blight in the soil is a result of a complex fungal symbiosis that leaches tellurium and selenium from the earth. The silver mines are not empty, Your Majesty. The remaining veins are simply bonded with sulfur in a molecular structure that renders them invisible and inaccessible to conventional mining. A dead silence fell over the court. The royal geologist, a wizened old man, stared, his mouth agape. That's impossible. We would have detected." "You were looking for the metal, not its ghost," Aurelius interrupted, his tone flat and factual. "I can provide a catalyst, a powder that, when mixed with water and poured onto the fields, will shatter the fungal bonds and restore the soil's balance within a single cycle of the moon. I can also provide a schematic for a resonant alembic that, when focused on the mine walls, will force the silver to shed its sulfuric bonds, revealing veins richer than any you have ever known." He spoke for an hour. He laid out plans for aqueducts, for crop rotation, for economic reforms. The knowledge flowed out of him, perfect, complete, and irrefutable. There was no debate. There were no questions he could not answer. He was not a man proposing ideas. He was a force of nature describing its own laws. The king, for the first time in years, sat up straight. A flicker of hope ignited in his tired eyes. "Do it," he commanded. "Captain Kalen, give him whatever he needs. All the resources of the crown are at his disposal." Aurelius returned to his tower, now a state-sanctioned miracle worker. The work was laughably easy. He created the catalyst powder, a shimmering lavender dust, by the barrelful, simply by passing common sand through a series of focused lenses and speaking a single, resonant word. He drew the schematics for the mining alembic in 10 minutes, the design flawless and beautiful in its efficiency. Captain Kalen became his conduit to the world. The gruff captain would arrive each morning, his suspicion slowly melting into a kind of grudging awe, and cart away the fruits of Aurelius's effortless labor. And the reports that came back were staggering. Fields that had been barren for a decade sprouted green shoots overnight. The first tests in the old mines revealed glittering silver veins of impossible purity. The city erupted, first in disbelief, then in wild, ecstatic celebration. The name Aurelius was chanted in the streets. They called him the Savior, the miracle of the spire. He watched the bonfires and dancing from his high window. He saw the joy, the tears of relief, the hope returning to the faces of the people. He had achieved his heart's desire. He had the means, and he was healing his broken land. But as he stood there, alone in his tower, filled with the silent, perfect hum of his art, he felt nothing but a profound and terrifying isolation. He had not toiled with the farmers in the resurgent fields. He had not swung a pickaxe with the miners. He had not shared a meal with the families he was saving. He had simply delivered a solution from on high, a distant, benevolent God dispensing miracles. The joy of the work, the shared struggle, the very human connection he had sought. The kingdom of Eldoria healed with a speed that felt both miraculous and deeply unnatural. Carts laden with shimmering silver once again trundled down from the mountains, their wheels no longer squeaking on desolate roads, but rolling through towns bustling with renewed life. The lavender dust worked its magic on the soil, and the harvest that followed was a thing of legend, with grain stalks thick as a man's thumb, and fruit so heavy they bowed the branches to the ground. Hunger, the silent beast that had haunted every home, was slain. The king, revitalized, declared a month of celebration. The Spire of Whispers was no longer a place of esoteric mystery. It was the revered source of their salvation, and Aurelius was its saint. Yet, from his high window, Aurelius experienced this salvation as a distant echo. He was the architect of the miracle, but he was not a part of it. He continued his work, fulfilling every request with the same effortless precision. He designed self-powering water pumps for irrigation, created a formula for mortar that would set as hard as granite in mere hours, and even devised a simple alchemical light source, a small, glowing orb that shone with the gentle light of the moon, to replace the smoky tallow candles in every home. Each creation was perfect. Each was delivered by Captain Kalen. Each further cemented his godlike status and deepened the chasm between him and the world he had saved. The unsettling hollowness in his chest began to fester. He had all the knowledge in the universe, but he had lost the joy of learning. He could create gold from lead, but he had lost the thrill of the chase. He tried to remember the frustration of a failed experiment, the small, triumphant spark of a minor discovery, but the memories were like faded tapestries, their colors bleached by the stark white light of his omniscience. The struggle, he realized, had been the point. The friction of mind against matter, the shared hope and despair with his fellow men, that was the true substance of life. He had wished it all away. His isolation was broken by an unexpected visitor, not Captain Kalen with a royal decree, but a hunched figure in a simple brown robe. It was Lyra, a young woman from the lower city who had occasionally sold him rare herbs in the years before his transformation. She had a sharp mind and a skeptical brow, and had always treated his alchemical ambitions with a mix of fascination and friendly scorn. She did not bow. "They call you a savior," she said, her voice quiet but piercing. She held up one of the glowing orbs he had created. "These are wonderful. My little brother can now read at night without straining his eyes. But my father, he was a candle maker. His father was a candle maker. It was all he knew." Aurelius stared at her. he no longer needs to work. The city treasury overflows. No one needs to toil in want. Want is not the only reason a man works, alchemist, Lyra replied, her gaze unwavering. He took pride in his craft, the scent of beeswax, the perfect wick, the way his candles would burn without smoke. You didn't just replace his product, you erased his purpose. He sits by the fire all day now, holding one of your perfect lights, and he looks empty. Her words were a physical blow. For the first time since drinking the elixir, an emotion pierced through his serene detachment, a cold spike of shame. He saw now that he wasn't just solving problems, he was overwriting reality, erasing the skills, traditions, and identities that had been woven into the fabric of the kingdom for centuries. The weavers, whose intricate patterns were now obsolete, the stonemasons whose careful work was replaced by his instant mortar, the farmers whose generational knowledge of the land was now irrelevant. He was saving their bodies while hollowing out their souls. The next crack in his utopia appeared in the form of Captain Kalen. The captain arrived one morning, not with a request, but with a problem. His face was grim, the lines around his eyes deeper than ever. "There's trouble in the Silver Hills, Aurelius," he said, foregoing any formality. "The miners you made so rich are at each other's throats. Fights, thefts. A man was killed yesterday over a disputed claim that is now worth 1,000 times what it was a month ago." He sighed, running a hand over his weary face. "And it's not just the miners. In the city, the guilds are in turmoil. The candle makers, the old masons, they protest. But what can they protest against? Progress. Your miracles." Aurelius felt a strange sense of vertigo. He had poured wealth and health into the kingdom, expecting peace to follow. Instead, he had simply given them new things to fight over, new ways to feel inadequate and lost. He had solved the problem of scarcity, but he had unleashed the far more complex demons of human nature: greed, jealousy, and existential dread. The final and most terrifying development came in a gilded scroll bearing the royal seal. It was a formal invitation. Cassian, his old rival, had returned to the capital. He was not skulking in the shadows as Aurelius had imagined. He had been welcomed as a hero. The scroll announced that King Theron, in his infinite wisdom, had appointed a second royal alchemist to oversee the kingdom's metaphysical defense. Cassian was to be Aurelius's equal. That evening, as the sun set, casting long, distorted shadows across his laboratory, Aurelius stared at his reflection in a polished silver mirror. He saw the face of a man who had gotten everything he ever wanted. He saw the serene, untroubled eyes, the placid expression. It was the face of a statue, not a man. There was no joy, no sorrow, no worry, just a calm, endless, and utterly unbearable perfection. He realized with a chilling certainty that the elixir hadn't just given him the power to grant his wish. It had trapped him inside it. His wish had been to have the means to heal this broken land. The elixir had complied perfectly. It had turned him into an instrument, a tool for healing. But a tool has no feelings, no desires of its own, no purpose beyond its function. It cannot grow, it cannot change, it cannot connect. He had not become a god. He had become a machine. A sudden, desperate desire ignited within him, the first true selfish want he had felt since the transformation. He wanted it to end. He wanted the struggle back. He wanted the frustration, the limitations, the messy, imperfect, beautiful chaos of being human. He looked at the vast array of powerful substances on his shelves, the tools that could reshape the world. For the first time, he turned their analytical power upon himself, asking a new question, not of alchemy, but of his own gilded cage. How do you undo a perfect wish? The question, how do you undo a perfect wish, became Aurelius's new obsession, a single dissonant note in the flawless symphony of his mind. He had spent his life seeking to eliminate variables, to purify substances, to achieve a perfect and predictable outcome. Now, his entire being yearned for the opposite, a flaw, a mistake, an escape route from the prison of his own success. He began with his own art. Secluded in his tower, he tried to formulate an antidote, an elixir of forgetfulness, or a potion of human frailty. But the elixir within him was not merely a substance, it was a self-aware, self-sustaining reality. For every path he conceived, his own perfect knowledge would instantly illuminate why it would fail. To create an antidote would be an act that contradicted his primary function, to provide the means to heal the land. The elixir, with flawless logic, prevented him from sabotaging his own purpose. He was a perfect system, and a perfect system does not allow for its own destruction. He could see every move on the chessboard, but every move led to the same checkmate against his own freedom. His internal struggle was interrupted by the arrival of the man who now haunted his thoughts. Cassian did not wait to be summoned. He strode into the laboratory as if he owned it, dressed in robes of shimmering silver silk that seemed to mock the lead ingots still lining the walls. His face, once sharp with lean ambition, was now fuller, softer. Power suited him. "Aurelius, my old friend," he began, his voice dripping with a feigned camaraderie that was sharper than any blade. He ran a dismissive hand over a complex distillation array. "Crude, but effective. You've laid a marvelous foundation. You fed the hungry and filled the treasury. You played the benevolent saint beautifully." Aurelius remained silent, his serene expression a mask for the vortex of revulsion within him. "But stability is a fragile thing," Cassian continued, his eyes glittering with a dangerous new light. "The people are idle, the guilds are restless, wealth has made them lazy and greedy. They need a firmer hand. They need direction." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your magic is the magic of sustenance. Mine is the magic of control. Imagine, Aurelius, alchemical lie detectors for the king's court, golems of clay and river water to enforce the law, tireless and unquestioning, potions to ensure loyalty, to quell dissent before it can even be spoken. We can build a perfect kingdom, not just of body, but of mind, an empire of absolute order." In that moment, Aurelius saw the abyss. Cassian was the monstrous logical conclusion of his own wish. He had sought to control reality, to eliminate suffering, but Cassian sought to control humanity itself, to eliminate dissent. He was holding up a dark mirror, and the reflection was terrifying. "That is not healing," Aurelius said, his voice quiet but cold. "That is tyranny." Cassian laughed, a short, barking sound. Semantics. It's peace. It's an end to the messy, unpredictable chaos you see brewing in the streets. But I can see the weight of this power has tired you. He patted Aurelius on the shoulder, a gesture of profound condescension. Don't worry. I am here now. I can bear this burden for you. Cassian's prediction proved true. The messy chaos exploded. A coalition of displaced guilds, candlemakers, masons, weavers, led by Lyra's grim-faced father, marched on the royal palace, not with weapons, but with the tools of their now useless trades held high like banners. They demanded not gold, but dignity, purpose, a return to a life where their hands and their knowledge had value. They were met by a line of palace guards. But the guards were not armed with simple steel. They carried heavy, ornate wands, Cassian's creation, that hummed with a low energy. When the crowd refused to disperse, the wands discharged bolts of crackling blue light, which did not wound, but seized the muscles, collapsing the protesters into spasming, helpless heaps. It was order enforced by alchemy, efficient, clean, inhumane. From his tower, Aurelius watched the scene unfold, his perfect vision showing him every grimace of pain, every tear of humiliation. Lyra was there, trying to drag her convulsing father from the square. He felt each spasm, each cry, as a failure of his own. He had created the gold that paid the guards, the peace that allowed Cassian to flourish, the technology that now subdued his own people. He was the root of all of it. Desperate, he fled the spire. He donned a simple traveler's cloak, the hood pulled low, and walked through the city he had reshaped. It was clean, well-fed, and soulless. The faces he saw were not joyful. They were listless, bored, or fearful. The human energy, the vibrant thrum of striving and commerce, had been replaced by a placid, sterile silence. He finally understood. A world without struggle is a world without meaning. His desperate pilgrimage led him to the one place his new mind had ignored, the dusty, cluttered apothecary at the edge of the old market, run by the stooped old man, Elias. The shop was an antidote to his new world. It was gloriously imperfect. Herbs hung in chaotic bunches, jars were mislabeled, and the air was a thick soup of 100 competing scents. It smelled of life. Elias looked up as he entered, his ancient eyes sharp and knowing. He seemed to see past the disguise, past the serene mask, and into the screaming soul of the man before him. "You look like a man who has found everything he sought," the old apothecary said, his voice raspy like dry leaves, "and discovered it was worthless." Aurelius, the man of perfect knowledge, the savior of the kingdom, found himself speechless. He simply nodded, the gesture feeling heavy, monumental. Perfection is a cage for gods and a poison for men, Elias continued, slowly wiping a dusty jar with a rag. We are defined by our imperfections, by our scars. A pot that is broken and repaired is often more beautiful than one that has never been tested. He gestured to a cracked ceramic bowl on his counter, its fissures mended with veins of glittering gold lacquer. The breaks are part of its story now. To erase them would be to erase its life. Aurelius stared at the bowl, at the lines of gold celebrating the damage. Kintsugi, the art of golden repair. His mind, for the first time, was presented with a concept it couldn't simply solve or dismiss. It was a philosophy, not a formula. "I cannot break the pot," Aurelius whispered, his voice cracking with the first real emotion he had shown in months. "The potter's hands are no longer my own. I can only make it more perfect." Elias looked at him with profound pity. "Then you cannot fix it from the outside. The flaw you seek must come from within the clay itself. You cannot add an imperfection. You must find the one that was always there." Aurelius left the shop, the old man's words echoing in his mind. The flaw that was always there, he could not create a flaw. He could not make a mistake. The elixir was designed to fulfill his wish. But what was his wish exactly? He replayed his own words from that fateful night. "Let my longing be made real. Let me have the means to heal this broken land." The means. He was the means. But the healing itself? That was the goal. And the land was not being healed. Its soul was being poisoned by his perfect solutions, and now by Cassian's tyranny. The elixir's core purpose was beginning to fail, not because of his actions, but because of the inherent messy nature of humanity itself. A new, terrifying, and brilliant idea began to form. A flaw was emerging in the system, a contradiction between the means and the end. He couldn't destroy his power. He couldn't renounce it. But what if he could give it away? The elixir was bound to him, a part of his very soul. A direct transfer was impossible. But if he could craft a situation so catastrophic, so fundamentally opposed to the idea of healing, it might create a paradox powerful enough to shatter the elixir's hold. He needed an act that would not just fail to heal, but would actively harm the kingdom on a spiritual level. He looked toward the royal palace, where Cassian was no doubt designing new and improved methods of control. Cassian was greedy, ambitious, and utterly without wisdom. He was the perfect vessel for disaster. Aurelius couldn't make a mistake himself, but he could, perhaps, create the conditions for someone else to make a mistake so colossal it would break the world. His new plan was the greatest alchemical gamble of all, to use his perfect power to orchestrate his own perfect failure. Aurelius's plan was a heresy against his own nature, a perfect act of sabotage disguised as an act of capitulation. He returned to his laboratory, but for the first time, he was not working to create. He was working to corrupt. He spent a week forging his masterpiece of betrayal. It was not a potion or a powder, but an object of hypnotic beauty, a crystal sphere the size of a human heart, pulsing with a soft inner silver light. Within the crystal, filaments of gold and lavender seemed to breathe. He called it the heart of harmony. It was the most perfect thing he had ever conceived, and the most dangerous. He requested an audience with Cassian, which was granted in the throne room. King Theron sat upon his throne, a limp puppet whose vacant eyes reflected the light of the heart Aurelius held in his hands. Cassian stood beside him, the true power in the room. "I have considered your proposal, Cassian," Aurelius said, his voice perfectly neutral. The effort to mask the swirling hope and terror within him was immense. "You were right. Order is the ultimate form of healing. My approach was incomplete." Cassian's eyes gleamed with triumph. "I knew you would see reason, old friend. I have created something to finalize our great work, Aurelius continued, stepping forward to present the orb. I call it the Heart of Harmony. It does not impose will through force like your crude wands. It synchronizes. The one who holds it can connect to the consciousness of every person in the kingdom, feel their thoughts, and gently align their will with his own. Total peace, absolute order. Cassian reached out, his eager fingers twitching. This is the power of a god. There is a condition, Aurelius added, his calmness the greatest deception of his life. To command their will, you must be connected to them. The heart will make you feel what they feel, their loyalty, their contentment, and their fear. That is the price of harmony, a total connection. Cassian laughed, an arrogant, dismissive sound. To feel the emotions of sheep, a small price to pay to become their shepherd. Give it to me. The test was held in the grand square, the very place where the protesters had been subdued. Lyra and her father, along with dozens of others, were brought from their cells, their faces a mixture of confusion and defiance. Cassian stood on the palace steps, the Heart of Harmony held high in his hand. "Citizens of Eldoria!" his voice boomed, amplified by the orb. "Your time of uncertainty is over. Today we become one. One will, one peace, one kingdom." He closed his eyes and activated the heart. Aurelius, standing hooded in the crowd, felt the shift. A wave of energy spread from the orb, silent and unseen. In his mind, he felt the elixir thrum in response, recognizing a grand-scale act of healing. The faces of the protesters went slack, their bodies relaxed. Submission was instant. Cassian's face was ecstatic. The power flowed into him. He could feel the heartbeats of 1,000 citizens, 1,000 wills ready to be commanded. But then Aurelius's condition made itself known. It was not a whisper, it was a roar. Beneath the surface of forced submission, he felt the simmering resentment of the artisans. He felt the terror of the families he had sundered. He felt the collective memory of a life of meaningful labor, the pride of a handmade creation, the pain of lost dignity. He felt Lyra's silent grief for her freedom and her father's helpless rage. This was not harmony. It was an ocean of repressed suffering, and he had just opened the floodgates into himself. Sweat beaded on his brow. The ecstatic expression twisted into a grimace of pain. To maintain control, he had to suppress this wave of feeling. He pushed more of his own will into the heart, trying to drown their agony under greater force. And there, Aurelius's paradox snapped into place. Cassian's ultimate act of healing, imposing order, was causing immense mental and spiritual pain, the fundamental opposite of healing. Inside Aurelius, the elixir, bound to this unsustainable contradiction, tore itself apart. Searing, real, burning pain exploded in Aurelius's chest. Perfection fractured. For the first time in months, he felt pure, cold fear. On the steps, Cassian was screaming. The feedback of suffering was too great. The golden filaments inside the Heart of Harmony turned black. Cracks spiderwebbed across the crystal surface. The very act of wanting total control over 1,000 souls was shattering his own. With a final inhuman cry, Cassian was overwhelmed. The heart of harmony exploded in a flash of black light and silence, disintegrating into inert dust that was carried away on the wind. Cassian collapsed, a vacant husk, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. The connection was severed. In the square, the people blinked, as if waking from a dream. Aurelius fell to his knees, gasping. The omniscient clarity in his mind was fading like mist in the sun. The constant hum in his ears, which he had stopped noticing, ceased, leaving a deafening silence. He looked at his hands, and for the first time, he saw not the flows of energy, but skin and bone and blood. Just hands, a man's hands. He felt the cold of the stone beneath his palms, the ache in his bones, a profound sorrow for Cassian, and a wave of relief so deep it made him weep. The tears, hot and salty, were the most wonderful sensation he had ever known. A year later, the gleam of Aurelius's miracles had faded. The gold he had created was still there, but its value had lessened. The kingdom had learned the hard way that wealth without work was meaningless. The soil, still fertile from the lavender dust, was once again tilled by calloused hands. The mines, still rich with silver, echoed with the sound of pickaxes and the songs of miners. The alchemist's spire stood empty. In the artisan's district, a small repair shop had opened. There, a middle-aged man with graying hair could be seen quietly mending broken chairs, cracked pots, and dull tools. His work was slow. He made mistakes. Sometimes he had to start over. But in his eyes was no longer the empty serenity of a god, but the quiet focus of a craftsman. One day, Lyra entered his shop, bringing him a bowl of stew. She sat and watched him work, carefully rejoining the pieces of a shattered ceramic cup. He did not seek to hide the cracks, but filled them with a simple lacquer made of sap and brass dust, leaving the lines of the break visible. "It's stronger now, where it was broken," she said softly. Aurelius looked up, a faint, weary but genuine smile on his face. He looked at the cup, and then at his own scarred hands. He had wished for the means to heal a broken land, and in the end he had succeeded, not by erasing the flaws, but by allowing the kingdom and himself to learn how to celebrate its own beautiful, golden repairs. 5 years passed. The memory of Cassian's tyrannical rule and Aurelius's frightening miracles faded into legend, a story parents told their children to teach the difference between wealth and worth. King Theron, freed from his torpor, but broken by the memory of his own powerlessness, had abdicated, leaving governance to a council of artisans and farmers led by a woman of quiet wisdom and capable hands, Lyra. Eldoria was no longer a kingdom, but a community. It was prosperous, but with a prosperity measured in full barns, laughter in the markets, and smoke rising from chimneys, not in bars of gold. As for the gold, that was where the last, most subtle remnant of Aurelius's wish lingered. The gold he had created from lead was, of course, alchemically perfect. It did not tarnish, corrode, or scratch. A coin minted under his influence was as bright and flawless today as on the day it was made. And that had become the problem. Aurelius, in his small repair shop, saw it every day. A farmer brought him a belt buckle made of the perfect gold. "It won't hold," he said, The leather strap just slips. It's too slick, too perfect. A goldsmith came to him, his face a mask of frustration. "I can't work this metal," he complained, setting a gleaming ingot on the workbench. "I cannot alloy it with silver. Copper will not mix with it. It rejects all impurity. I can make nothing from it but coins or smooth, lifeless statues. It refuses to change." The gold's perfection had become its curse. It was a sterile scar on the kingdom's economy. People preferred to trade in earthenware pots and sacks of grain than use the cold, immutable coins. The perfect gold was a reminder of a time when effort was meaningless, and it made any effort upon it equally useless. One evening, as Aurelius was sweeping his shop, Lyra entered. Her hair was now streaked with a few threads of silver, and her eyes held the weariness and clarity of a leader. She said nothing for a long moment, simply observing a small chest filled with the perfect gold coins Aurelius had received in payment over the years and never used. "It's the last ghost, isn't it?" she finally said. Aurelius nodded. "It healed the land, but it poisons trade. It is pure, but it prevents any new creation. It is the echo of my arrogance." "No," Lyra said softly. "It's the final challenge." She sat across from him on a stool he had repaired for her years ago. "I didn't come to see the alchemist. There's no room for magic in Eldoria anymore. I came to see Aurelius, the metallurgist, the craftsman." He looked up, intrigued. "You spent your life learning how to purify substances to make them perfect," she continued. "Now, we need you to teach us the opposite. How do we make it imperfect again? How can we introduce a flaw into that which is flawless?" She was not asking him to change it with a snap of his fingers. She was asking for his knowledge, his human expertise. She was asking him to lead a workshop, not to fix cups, but to fix the very soul of their kingdom's metal. A familiar slowness, a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying, seemed to lift from his shoulders. The elixir had forced him to give answers. Lyra was asking him to share questions. Aurelius looked at the gleaming ingot on his workbench. For the first time, he saw not a failure, but a project that would require forges and coal and dirty hands and experiments, a project that might fail, a project he would have to undertake with others. He smiled, a true smile that reached his tired eyes. "I think we'll have to start with a great deal of heat and a little sulfur," he said. "Sulfur was always excellent for tarnishing gold. It will be messy work, and there's no guarantee it will succeed." "Good," Lyra said, her own smile echoing his. "That's the only way it will have any worth." The alchemist had healed the kingdom with a perfection that nearly destroyed it. The artisan now would help to save it by teaching everyone the saving grace of a simple tarnish. The project to undo perfection began not in the grand spire of an alchemist, but in the grime and heat of a blacksmith's forge. Aurelius, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, was no longer a lone genius, seeking a singular, flawless answer. He was a collaborator, a teacher, a student. He gathered the kingdom's finest artisans, the frustrated goldsmith, the stoic blacksmith, the meticulous potter, and even farmers who knew the secrets of soil and ash. They brought not only their skills, but their failures. The first attempts were disastrous. They blasted the perfect gold with intense heat, only to see it refuse to melt alongside lesser metals. They mixed it with corrosive acids, which rolled off its surface like water from a duck's back. They hammered it, trying to beat an impurity into its very structure. But the gold remained stubbornly, maddeningly pure. For months, their only product was frustration. The pile of immutable gold ingots seemed to mock them. Some artisans gave up, returning to their own more rewarding work. But Aurelius, for the first time in his life, found joy in the process of failing. Each dead end was a lesson. Each failure was a shared experience. The breakthrough came from Lyra. She was observing Aurelius as he sharpened a chisel on a large spinning grindstone, sending a shower of sparks into the air. He was coated in a fine layer of gray dust. "What is that dust?" she asked. "Stone, steel, the remnants of effort," Aurelius answered, wiping his brow. Lyra looked from the dust on his skin to the gleaming, untouched gold ingot on a nearby bench. "You have been trying to add a substance to the gold," she said thoughtfully. "What if it doesn't need another element? What if it needs a history? What if it needs to be mixed with the dust of our work?" It was a poet's idea, not a scientist's. And for that reason, it felt right. With renewed purpose, they built a new, special crucible. Into it, they placed not just the perfect gold and a measure of copper, but also a spoonful of dust from the grindstone, a pinch of ash from the forge's hearth, and a fleck of dried clay from the potter's wheel. They did not ask for a miracle. They asked the gold to join their world of effort and imperfection. They heated the crucible, the bellows groaning like a tired beast. This time, something was different. As the gold finally began to glow with a liquid heat, the copper did not sit separately, but swirled into it. The motes of dust and ash did not burn away, but were consumed, integrated, becoming part of the whole. When they poured the metal, it was not the sterile, perfect yellow of before. It was a warmer, richer hue, like autumn sunlight, with subtle, darker veins running through it that shimmered faintly. The goldsmith took a piece and struck it with a hammer. It yielded. It dented. He let out a cry of pure joy. He could work it. They called the process the Eldorian tarnish. It was a technique that could not be perfected because its very nature was to embrace imperfection. Each batch was unique, carrying the faint signature of the dust and ash used in its creation. Decades later, Aurelius was a very old man. His hands were gnarled with arthritis, his back bent, but his eyes were clear. He sat on a public bench in Eldoria's main square, a square paved not with flawless marble, but with stones worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. He watched the life of the town. He saw a young woman fastening a cloak with a clasp of Eldorian gold, its warm, veined surface a perfect match for the rough-spun wool. He saw a merchant weighing vegetables on a scale with tarnished gold counterweights. He saw, carved into the lintel of the council hall, the town's motto, inlaid with a metal that was once their curse and was now their pride. Fortior infractis, stronger where it was broken. An old woman with silver hair and a leader's steady gaze came to sit beside him, sharing the warmth of a loaf of fresh bread. It was Lyra. They didn't speak for a long time. They no longer needed to. Finally, Aurelius reached into his pocket and pulled out a single coin. It was one of the first successful pieces, and he had carried it for years. It was no longer bright and slick. The edges were worn smooth from his touch, the surface warm from his body heat. It felt less like a metal and more like a stone from a riverbed shaped by time and pressure. He looked at the coin, then at the thriving, bustling, imperfect world around him. He had once sought the power to heal all the world's flaws. He had found instead the quiet wisdom to love them. Closing his hand around the warm, worn coin, Aurelius smiled. His work was, at last, perfectly incomplete, and it was good.